You want to do most things in your power to make sure that your compliance burden is not onerous. So what are payment gateways? Put quite simply, they are a service that accepts payments so that you don't have to. You're probably aware of quite a few payment gateways. They usually end with pay. That's a bit of a hint. And actually, marketing has told me I'm not allowed to name any of them. So I'm just going to let you guess. So what do we need from a payment gateway, and what do they usually do? People tend to focus a lot on about securing the transaction, because that's quite important. You want to make sure your credit card details aren't intercepted. That's what a payment gateway needs to do. It also has some other functional requirements, like it needs to be able to charge that credit card, and it needs to, and there's no point in them holding on the money. They need to send that money to you. In the context of this talk, we'll mostly be talking about e-commerce websites. I have looked into the implementations for mobile payment gateways. They're actually pretty similar. There's usually a lot of parties involved in the use of a payment gateway. The important one is the customer, so that's us. That's the customer is the person that wants to buy the thing. There is us, the merchant that wants to sell the thing. There's the payment gateway that wants to accept the payment for that thing. And then there's the banking entity that usually finalizes the charging of that card or that payment method. I include them here because this is not strictly true, but they're usually involved in the policing of PCI compliance. So let's take a trip down memory lane for payment gateways. This is kind of relevant for understanding why they're designed the way they are these days. So in 1991, the first commercial net appears. Goodness me, I looked into the history of the internet. Yeah, let's not go there. But before 91, all nets were non-profit, and you couldn't have an e-commerce website, so that wouldn't have been possible for a payment gateway. Feb 95, Netscape Navigator 1.1 is released. Goodness me. What's notable of 1.1 is it's the first browser that has SSL. It has SSL version 2 in this because SSL version 1 was broken and was never released publicly. In 1997, Authorized Net is released. This is the first payment gateway. I'll be using this as an example later on. In October 1999, PayPal is launched. This is the first, I hope it's the first, because I said it, the first customer-to-customer digital wallet. I guess it's kind of interesting to know that when they launched, they were not yet a payment gateway. You actually sent money between each other, between PayPal accounts, and then you send that money to your bank account. So, cool. December 2004, in a day that will live in infamy, PCI DSS version 1 is released. A lot of people were kind of, I don't know if I should say it. So there's some things to be said about PCI, but I think it's done a lot of good. And I think it's really important to think back to the reputation of buying online in the early 2000s. I think PCI DSS has done a lot of good for repairing that reputation. Moving right ahead, in 2013, PCI DSS 3 is released. It's notable for the inclusion of the compliance level SAQ AEP. This may mean nothing to you. I'll explain it later. Needless to say, for a lot of people, including payment gateways, this was the end of days. So I'll try and make this interesting. So PCI, put quite simply, if you are accepting payments, you need to follow PCI DSS compliance guidelines. to find out what your compliance requirements are and what parts of your systems need to be compliant. That's an exercise called scoping. So PCI defined that as the identification of people, processes, and technologies that interact with or could otherwise impact the security of cardholder data. So this is relevant for finding out what your compliance level is. If you use a payment gateway, like a modern payment gateway, you're most likely going to fall within the SAQA bracket, and that's only 14 requirements. You could probably do that today. If you choose to accept card data yourself and to keep them on your systems, you're most likely going to fall within SAQD compliance requirements, and that's 335. Like, some of them are easy and some of them are, you need a SOC. It's expensive and onerous, and you're going to have a bad time. In the middle here, SAQA EP, which was released with version 3, this was created in response to some things that the PCI industry was seeing. It's basically, you're using a payment gateway, but you have more control over the flow of that card data. And in this scenario, I'll use the example of a direct post. So here we go. How far through are we? We're at the sequence diagrams now. Let's start from the start. We're in the middle. We're the merchant. Our customer is buying from us, and our payment gateway is here on the right. The customer has finished shopping for socks, and they go to the checkout, and it's an HTTP GET request. The merchant, who is aware of what's in their cart, pre-populates that checkout form, and includes things like the merchant ID for the payment gateway. It includes the amount that we want to charge the card, and other incidentals are included in that form. The customer enters their credit card details into this form, and they press submit. It posts all that information, the amount, the credit card, and the merchant ID to the payment gateway, who then do their thing. In fact, this example, which we'll go to next, is from 97, and I don't know what happens after this. I assume it's a redirect. So let's look. So I'll explain why this is probably not what you want to do in this clip here. So I used the Wayback Machine, and I looked at Authorized Net in 1997 and what their implementation guide had. So this was their direct post example. I hope you can read that. I'll be talking to it. So this, yeah, I can hear some people. This is HTML forms, people. This is 1997. All right. This is your checkout form. It is a post form, and it is posting all the contents of this form to Authorized Net's direct post endpoint. There are a bunch of hidden inputs here, hidden. So you as the merchant are expected to fill out this information. The customer, when the HTTP is rendered in their browser, is expected to fill in their card data. Cool. So there's a couple things wrong here. And it comes back to this: do not trust the client. There's nothing stopping me pressing F12 and changing the amount. Equally, there's nothing stopping me changing anything in this field. So for that reason alone, you shouldn't do this. But there's another reason here that's probably not so obvious, and it's to do with PCI DSS. So if you use this method, you will be SAQA EP. So that's 135 requirements you need to meet. And the reason for that is this. You are responsible for where the card data here is going to. Your servers are directly responsible for this. So if your server gets hacked, then someone can change this, and that's the idea anyway. So don't do this. Don't do it. Actually, curiously, this is still in actually quite reputable payment gateways, like for legacy reasons. You can still use it. This is a good implementation. This is SAQA compliant. I call it the tokenization example. It's very similar to the start. Customers done, they've got all their socks, maybe they've got like a Pokemon one. And they go to the checkout and they want to populate they want to pay for it. So they request the checkout, and the merchant, before the merchant populates that form, they request a client token from the payment gateway. And this is key to not trusting the client. Thankfully, Ben before me explained what JWTs are, and they're JSON objects with signatures attached. So the signature ensures the integrity of what is in that JSON web token. So the merchant requests a client token. That client token includes the merchant ID, customer ID. It can include whatever assertions you want in it. The payment gateway returns that, and the merchant includes that client token in the form, in the checkout form that they create. What's the key difference here between this example and the previous example is this JavaScript here. So the JavaScript is what is going to populate the form field, the credit card fields, and it's what's responsible for determining where that card data is posted. So your server is not responsible for where the card data eventually ends up, and that's the key distinction. So the JavaScript populates the credit card forms, the user enters their credit card details, and they post all that data. So the post includes the client token, so it includes all our things that we trust because we've got it from the payment gateway, and it includes the credit card. At this point, the card is tokenized, so it's really just kind of kept on the payment gateway side, and they send us a nonce back, which is a reference to that card information. The customer sends that nonce to us, the merchant, and we finalize the payment by sending that nonce and the amount. And we charge the card at this point, and they send us a success, and we tell the customer whether that was cool or not. I really like this solution because it's all sort of request response type stuff. There's no, I'm going to say webhooks because that's the next example. There's no like Redis. There's nothing, no internet magic happening here. This is another still reputable example. It's very similar to the first one. The first half, you're requesting the form, getting a client token. The key distinction is at the very end, where the card data and the client token is sent, and instead of the payment gateway responding to the client with a nonce, it's instead responding to the merchant. It's triggering a webhook on the merchant, and the merchant is telling the customer whether that's okay or not. I use this example here, I confuse you with two examples here of SAQA, because there's another important thing that I've said again, I'm going to keep saying. It's about not trusting the client. I'm going to point out amount as an example here, because the number of pen tests I've done where you could change the amount. So the merchant is sending the amount directly to the payment gateway in this example. In the previous example, the amount is sent directly from the merchant to the payment gateway in this step here. So at no point, like in our first example, where you could change the amount, is it possible to be adulterated by the customer. What's also not immediately obvious here is that this communication between the merchant and the payment gateways is usually happening with a server-side SDK. So, I mean, in this example here, this client token is really just calling a function in the server-side SDK, which is not what can be said for every single payment gateway. And here's I'm not allowed to say who this is, so I'm just going to run through what this payment gateway gets you to do in the implementation guide. Put our script in your HTML. That's it. That sounds so easy. I should use that. So it is a client-only SDK, and so what you'll hopefully have learned by now is that with client-only SDKs, there's no server-side SDK, there's no method for us to create a token or some kind of promise between us and the payment gateway, so that when we're sending data through the client, we can assure its integrity. In this payment gateway, you're basically putting the amount in the form in your HTML and trusting that no one changes it. Now you might say that that's okay, that's cool, Steve. I will check it afterwards. And that's fine. That's fine. You can log into the payment gateway and see how much they actually ended up paying. But this particular payment gateway chooses to bury that validation functionality like deep in their documentation. So if you're not at a security conference and are aware of things like validating the transaction, if you're using a client-side, client-only SDK, then maybe you won't know to do that. So that's some advice. This is probably not relevant to any of the principles I've talked about, but if your payment gateway wants you to enter your bank credentials, don't do that. I don't care how often they're audited and that they show you their audits, but they're basically acting as a proxy for your banking credentials. And it's kind of actually not about the integrity of this payment gateway. It's really, so I used to work at a bank, and the banks have to compromise their security controls so that this payment gateway can act as a proxy. So we're all losing. In fact, if we need to blame the banks for it, if you want to get angry at the banks, get angry at them for like not putting transaction as a function in their open banking APIs. So don't put your credentials in a payment gateway. Cool, so hopefully that was very helpful. I just want to summarize. I'm going to keep saying it again. Don't trust the client. Payment gateways, the fees. A lot of people get upset about how much they cost. Usually payment gateways cost about 2.9% plus 30 cents per transaction. This is cheaper than meeting 335 PCI DSS requirements. Not all gateways are created equal. The best advice I can give is if there's no validation guide or if there's no server-side SDK, it's probably not one you want to use. And lastly, do not trust the client. Thank you. Yes.
Do we have any questions?
Yes. So what happens if your payment gateway only offers a client-side SDK and you don't have any choice but to use that payment gateway?
A client-side SDK.
Yeah.
So the bad example I mentioned, they bury the webhook. So in that second good example, there's a webhook at the very end of the transaction where the payment gateway will trigger your webhook with the details of the transaction that's just occurred. So you can reconcile that transaction against what has actually occurred in the payment gateway. Otherwise, mantronically, yeah, there's some external reconciliation that has to happen. Yeah. So it is possible if you've got a client-only SDK, but it would be outside of the sort of flow of that payment gateway.
Sure.
I guess we can take one more question.
Is the page redirection payment that is offered by a lot of gateways, is it the best and this most securest form of?
It functions practically identically to the examples I gave. So instead of fetching the JavaScript, it will redirect you. They actually kind of use the same mechanisms for the integrity aspects of the communications between yourself and, so same, it's the same, yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, okay, cool, thanks.